I'm Andy Hill. I'm the co-founder and creative director at Voicebox. So, who we are at Voicebox, we work directly with boys and young people in schools across the country. So, not exclusively boys, but all young people as well. And our focus is simple, though it's not easy, to create a space for boys to examine the messages they've inherited and support them to reimagine masculinity in ways that support well-being, connection, and growth. Like I mentioned, we run both single gender and co-educational sessions, depending on the needs of the schools. And we think that both are really important. In terms of the messages we're giving to boys, we don't start with answers, we start with questions because we found that boys are far more likely to respond to conversation rather than information or correction. And our core message is there's more than one way to be a man, which has been repeated again and again, which is, yeah, just emphasizes the importance of this point, I feel. There's more than one way to be a man, and you get to shape what that looks like. So that message sits within our practical, evidence-informed, healthy masculinity framework, which we use across all of our work. And this means helping boys to have flexibility in their identity. So helping boys understand there is no single blueprint for being a man. Masculinity can stretch, it can adapt, it can evolve. It also means promoting authenticity. So asking boys who they are beneath the mask. Again, it's that values driven approach. So what matters to you? How do you want to show up in the world? And then finally, reframing. So with certain groups of boys, we want to potentially work with some of these kind of traditional ideas, like maybe courage, strength, loyalty, some of these potential traditional ideas that have been socialized for boys, and channel them in ways that are helpful rather than harmful. So this framework, it gives boys something to move towards, not just away from. And it's not a new script, right? It's not a new set of ideas that we want boys to aspire towards. It's a invitation, it's a framework to help boys reflect and explore masculinity and what that can mean in a positive way. Like Daniel said, it's not just what we say, but how we say it as well. It's not just the messages we give, but how we give those messages. So I've also just wanted to share some of the key ingredients that support the positive conversations we're having with boys in schools. And the first one is being real. So if we're asking boys to be authentic, to be real, we have to lead by example. So our facilitators, they model that openness, they model that honesty. So for example, a session might start with a check-in, how we're doing. One of our facilitators might say something like, I woke up this morning, missed my alarm, ended up skipping breakfast. I'm a bit flustered, but I'm here today and I'm excited to deliver this session. And that very simple, kind of unpolished, like opening to a session is actually really powerful because it signals to the boys, you don't have to perform here. You don't have to be perfect. You can be real. You can express normal emotions. I'm human too, right? We're all human. We're all fallible. And that helps set the tone for these positive messages to kind of land and for us to have more honest conversations. The second ingredient is being dynamic. So our sessions are very interactive, energetic, and playful, but being dynamic doesn't just mean keeping boys moving. It means not sticking to a rigid plan. So we're not walking them through a kind of fixed linear sequence of questions. You know, what does it mean to be a man? Where do these ideas come from? How does that cause harm? Discuss. Because we find that that approach can kind of sometimes we found that that can lead boys to switch off, or it can lead boys to just kind of give us the answers that they think we want. So instead, by being dynamic, what we mean is by kind of reading the room, responding in real time. So for example, we might have an activity where students move across the room in response to statements like anyone who has cried recently. And then depending on who's moved or if some students have moved, we then pause and explore. So we say, you know, oh, that's interesting. Why did these people move? What do we notice here? What's going on when only a few people have moved? And then that moment becomes the learning, right? So you can't really pre-plan that moment because different students will respond in different ways. So yeah, being dynamic when we're delivering these kind of positive messages, I think is really important for engagement. And then finally, being curious. So when something difficult or provocative is said, we don't shut it down, we stay curious. So the goal isn't to kind of correct or prove the boy wrong. Oh, actually, this is you're wrong when you say that. It's not to win an argument, it's to open a door because behind every comment is a clue to what's really going on beneath, what's going on underneath the surface. And so we need to respond with curiosity in order for boys to open up, rather than if we try and correct them, they might get defensive and disengaged. So what makes a message positive? So yeah, again, through our work in schools, we've identified three more principles for you that shape effective messaging. Number one is meeting boys where they are. So different contexts require different strategies. For example, some boys that we speak to derive a real sense of meaning and identity in kind of traditional ideas of masculinity, traditional gender roles, traditional masculine norms. Um, some of which are harmful, some of which may be less so potentially. But for example, traits like strength, loyalty, or leadership can carry weight and meaning for some boys. So in these settings with these boys, we found it to be more effective to reframe masculinity rather than kind of reject these kind of ideas outright. So, we discuss, can strength mean opening up rather than doing it alone? Can leadership mean building others up, not dominance or status? So kind of working with these ideas rather than rejecting them. Whereas other boys, they feel far less connected to these traditional ideas. In fact, they may fall victim to some of these traditional ideas. And with these boys, discussions might focus a lot more on being a good human rather than focusing on kind of being a good man, which may land and resonate with other boys. So in every context, we begin with reflection so that we can deliver flexible, context-sensitive messaging. Number two, we focus on relationships, not lectures. So I know Darshan spoke about this a lot, but I'm sure everyone else as well. I'm sure, where we've learned that boys don't change when they're just told to change, right? The change comes because we've listened to them, because we've showed them that we care, that we value their thoughts and opinions, and then modeling something better and working with them through that. So we believe a positive approach leads with empathy and connection. It's relational, not didactic. We help boys understand what shaped them. This is the third principle. So the most transformative moments in our work often come when a boy is reflecting, where did I get that message? Who taught me that? Do I still believe in it? So rather than prescribing a new identity, a positive message is helping boys reflect, to understand what shaped their ideas, and then supporting them to make informed ones moving forward. So why do these messages matter? I mean, we kind of know why these messages matter. That's why we're all here. But, because if we want to reduce male suicide, school exclusions, serious youth violence, not in employment, education and training rates, and men's violence against women and girls, all of which are obviously very um, serious societal issues that we want to address, we need to start upstream. We need to start by looking into the beliefs, the behaviors, and the identities that boys are developing. We have to ask, what are boys being taught about how to be men? And we need to work with those. Because too often boys are taught, don't show emotion, don't ask for help, be dominant, be in control, don't be gay, don't be like a girl, among many other messages as well. But these aren't just messages, they become survival strategies. So they're learned performances of masculinity that boys believe will keep them safe, accepted, or respected. So when a boy is kind of showing off, shutting down, lashing out, disengaging, it might not necessarily be defiance. It might well be a performance of masculinity. And so our job is to look beneath the surface. I'm going to give a quick example for that. So, for example, this is something that, we speak to schools about as a growing issue. So, a year 10 boy receives a nude from someone else and he shows his friends and his friends laugh and cheer him on. This is obviously very serious, a very harmful, potentially very harmful incident that needs to have clear boundaries and sanctions if such an incident happens. But in the context of a workshop where we're exploring such a scenario, we need to, we need to, before we just educate on what's wrong, don't do that, it's wrong. We need to think about what's happening beneath the surface, right? So what's he trying to prove, this boy who does this? What has he learned about status, about power, about masculinity? How is approval earned in his particular peer group? And then often underlying this behavior is actually something very human and something we can really connect with. It might be, not in all cases, but it might be a boy who wants to belong, who wants connection, who wants approval, but has been taught to get it in harmful ways, right? Has been taught to get that sense of connection through harmful methods. So instead of shame, we respond with insight. I understand that you want to impress your friends, but let's talk about how to do that without hurting someone else. So we connect, then correct. So it's still very much about accountability, but it's rooted in that understanding. And when we do this consistently, then it doesn't just help individual boys, but it starts to shift the culture as well. So just finally, what are those messages that we think are unhelpful? Already covered a lot of these so far, but the big one, boys are the problem. So this toxic masculinity narrative, often well meant, but in school settings, it often lands as blame. Boys hear it as you are the issue and either shut down or push back. We found boys respond much better if they're offered a sense of belonging rather than blame. Bad behavior equals bad character. So again, if we focus only on what boys do, we miss why they're doing it. So quick punishments often skip that kind of relational work that you need to do in order to get real change. And as I established, a lot of behavior is performative rather than it not being pathology. And then finally, information equals change. Just telling boys what not to do doesn't work. They're usually not one fact or piece of information away from behavior change, right? Boys need support to understand what's behind their behavior, behind their actions, and then what they could do differently. So my final thought is just boys don't need rescuing. They need space to speak honestly, to question the scripts that they've inherited, and to imagine something better. If we want boys to grow into emotionally grounded, thoughtful young men, we have to meet them where they are and walk with them as they grow. Because when boys thrive, everybody benefits. Thank you very much. I'll take your questions if you have any.
At one point, you were saying some boys have got traditional ideas of masculinity, and but you seem to imply that these were necessarily harmful. And I'm wondering, you know, if a boy thinks that strength and leadership and being a father and being a provider um, are the values which he has, why not? That is, they're not necessarily harmful.
No.
There are harmful
Mm,
versions of it.
yeah, no, I think perhaps I miscommunicated. I think that that's exactly what I was saying is that actually part of the framework is potentially working with some of these traditional ideas, right? So so rather than reject masculinity as this, um, toxic thing, like you mentioned, working with some of these ideas, so strength, toughness, resilience, leadership, whatever they might be, yeah, like you said, they're not inherently toxic or harmful. So yeah, working with them, but ensuring that we're reframing them in line with connection, with growth, with well-being. Because yeah, it's about that nuance, right? If you think being a man is about being strong, but that means that if you're struggling, you don't open up, you don't seek the support that you need, then it becomes a harmful idea that you have, right? So yeah, so it's opening those conversations up and having that balanced conversation of how might this cause problems, how could it be useful, and then obviously steering it towards the more useful side of how they interpret those expectations.
Thank you. Anybody else got a question to anybody? Because now we can now throw it open um, more
Well,
widely.
I think just that question again, really, about you know, what's your group sizes, how are the boys selected, etc., etc.
Yeah. Yeah, so we primarily deliver the sessions co-ed, so mixed gender sessions. We would normally go into a school and work with their form groups. So it's about groups of 30 in a typical state school. Um, and yeah, so it's kind of mixed gender. So we're not selective. I think being selective only works when you're guaranteed you're going to be working with them for more than one session. So often we might get teachers who say, "Oh yeah, we've got this group of boys who are really difficult. Can you come in and deliver a session for them?" In that instance, we'll advise them that we wouldn't do that because if we just target those specific boys, well, I think Daniel touched on this earlier as well, but yeah, just immediately targeting them, they're going to come with assumptions. They're going to come very defensive, and it kind of misses the wider cultural school work that needs to happen to kind of make any sort of change meaningful as well. But yeah, so unless there's going to be sustained change, I would be very, very cautious of working within like specific groups of boys.